and I'm the project director for our school's NEH grant. And today it's a great honor that we have Dr. Al-Musawi, a very, very prolific scholar who teaches in Columbia University, and he's the author of 28 books, and he's also the editor for the Journal of Arabic Literature, and he also is the author of Islam on the Street, and we actually also have some of his book, and so if you're interested in purchasing his book, Islam on the Street, Amy from our bookstore will be in charge of selling his book, so in case you're interested in his book, please talk to Amy after the lecture. And today's lecture, Arab Popular Revolution Stage in Collect Well, dealing with the inception of popular revolution in the Arab world and the value of the West to stand for democracy in the Arab world. And there's a need in the academy and the educated society to understand the formation, the process of this revolution beyond stereotype of an East that's dormant and unable to change. And the lecture focused on the working of science in the makeup collective will, and the inevitable setting of the stage for popular solidarity is another outlook that reads people in action as they are formed by roads that strike deep roots in memory. And Dr. Al-Musawi is a prolific scholar, and he's also a well-known critic over the Arab world and in the Western academies. So without further ado, let's give him a warm welcome for flying all the way from New York City to here.
Thank you, Professor Schwan. Thank you, Dr. Muhsin, and all of you for being here with us. And I should thank also the NEH for making this possible as a visit. And so today, then, I'm going to address the whole idea of popular revolutions, how they erupt and why. But I'm going to speak specifically about certain aspects of these revolutions, certainly as they manifest to us the iconic and the verbal thrust. So I'm not talking about only the political side. My emphasis will be laid more on the poetic, let us say, side, politics in the general term, that is, how these revolutions work, because my understanding of these revolutions that years ago there were similar happenings, uprisings, and so on. Actually, in Algeria, when it was under the colonial rule, for instance, in 1945, there was the May uprising, May 8th, they call it. And if you go to very many accounts of that, but especially in narratives, you go to the Algerian writer, Francophone that is, in this case, his narrative, Najma. It is called Najma Star, that is in Arabic. And you find that every now and then, Katib Yassin refers to that uprising. Now, what is important to me in that uprising is not how Katib Yassin goes around that uprising, but what is important, two significant things. First of all, how the uprising make it possible for people in the street to emerge as a power that can derive its self-recognition from being together. So this togetherness then is a collective will, being together against the French. And at the same time, this togetherness is not a side effect. It is not a mere incidental something in the history of the movement itself. It is important because there is a divide, another divide between the colonial on the one hand and the rising bourgeois, that is the one which is still working with the colonial. That is the divide. The other divide, which is important, is religious, in the sense that what you get there is that God is no longer somebody, some power, somewhere. No, God is being brought in that narrative to the street. And what you have two representatives of religion. One of them, the Mufti, that is institutionalized religion, who is telling the demonstrators, go home. We cannot face the colonial power. It is too much for us. And the Imam in the mosque is telling them a different story. Think of God as a newspaper vendor, one of you as a demonstrator. Don't show up in the mosque. Be there in the street and the struggle against the colonial. Look at the two divides which we have right now. So God is being brought. Now that is important for us because what we have Khatib Yasin mentioning through the voice of one of the characters that there is a feeling that there is a people. Now look at that, conceptualization of a people. And the other thing is that God is humanized. That is, the struggle itself is very important in this sense, and that religion is not some power which falls outside you, it is inside you, and it should be working with you in that struggle against the colonial for liberation. Remember that 1954 was a landmark in the history of Algeria, in the sense that it will be leading soon to the liberation movement and later on to the independence. That is one. The other occasion which is worth remembering is that in 1977, January also, in Tahrir Square in Cairo, there were the large demonstrations which took place there in Cairo against the Sadat policy, the open door policy which started at that time. And the students usually, and certainly other segments of the society, gathered together and they occupied actually the Tahrir Square for one day and one night until they were beaten up. They raised slogans and they have also an nasheed, that is an anthem, and the anthem of the country, Biladi Biladi, that is my homeland, my homeland. It starts like that. Now the question is why they failed. I'm not suggesting that what happened in Tahrir Square over time, right now, is necessarily successful. Not yet. Not yet. Two things. First of all, we need to think of history then as a process. And it is as a formation process that we should be looking at it. Now, we shouldn't be looking anymore at political actors as the only actors who are capable of representing a will of the people. And the very term democracy should be questioned right now. We should not really stick to things which we have been taken for granted for a long time, thinking of them as long as they were successful or so. In Europe, for instance, they should be successful within the same terms in other regions of the world. There are other manifestations of a will, and so we should be looking for these manifestations as they are very important for us, and as they are going to be the decisive moments in the history to come. So all these are very important for us to see then and to watch for. And as I said, the question which we have been raising then, why the failure before? Why the possibility of success then? That is a very good question. Let us go to the scene itself. And I use the word staging because unless you think of these people, not necessarily as multitudes, but as a collective. And remember that when you say that people is a collective, it doesn't mean that you deny the possibility that there will be a divide among these. But for a certain moment, under a certain specific pressure, there will be such a movement. And within that frame, then, we are speaking of a people. We cannot continue speaking about the people, by the way. But for that time, for a specific moment in history, there is this kind of identification, which is very important to notice. How does this identification take place? Let us go to the scene itself. When it erupted in Algeria, for instance, we speak about a popular revolution. When it erupted in Tunisia, we speak about a popular revolution. How that took place? What was it that made this possibility there in Tunisia, for instance? Staging. That is what happened, first of all, is that people took to the street. That is, taking to the street, it means that you are reclaiming the place which has already been taken over by the nation state for a long time, as your custodian and representative. So actually, the street or the square for a long time have been denied to you. As a public sphere, certainly it has been denied to you for a long time, because you are regulated, you are put into certain compartments to behave accordingly. You shouldn't cross from here, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, and so on. All the regulations are coming to you from the top. You are merely an obedient listener, and you are obliged to follow accordingly. That is one. What happened in the street or the square in Tunisia is that kind of proclamation, a reclamation in which you are telling the nation state that you are no longer representing me. I am representing myself. All the group, we recognize the fact that this representation is not going to last for a long time, but it is good to keep it in mind and work accordingly then. Now, is this enough by itself to bring people together? No. You need a slogan. And this slogan should be representing also a collective. If it fails, then there is a danger of disruption and failure. So what was the slogan then? The slogan at that time was taken from a poem which happened to be by Abu Qasim Shabi, the Tunisian poet who died in 1934. Now, look at that. That poem for a long time has been in memory because it has been used in textbooks, generally speaking. So whoever attended school will learn by heart that kind of poem, which says simply the opening line: if people ever want life, fate should positively respond. Simple. But it is not as simple as you might imagine. But we have a number of conceptualizations within a line of poetry. First of all, a people conceptualized as such, as a group, as a collective. That is one. Life is willed. It is not given to you. You make life. That is another. The third thing, which is also important, fate. Now, fate is no longer relegated somewhere in divinity. It is brought in here, in the street, to listen to you, to respond to you. So there is a correspondence then between this will of the people and this kind of fate. So the fate and the divine are brought together. Now remember how to connect. That is, in the 1945 uprising in Algeria, the preacher is telling people, think of God as one of you, as a newspaper vendor, fighting and struggling like you. Now, that's one. Here right now, faith is being brought to you. It is responding to you. That is another. People is being used there. People is being used here. That is, all these that then are very important. When we talk about a verbal thrust, then we should recognize that there is something which is needed to bring people together, not to divide, to bring people together. And the term people is very collective, as I said, and at the same time it is general, and also it is vague. This is why in Arabic, if you go to the Arabic, it can mean two things: nas, any people, and people as a group. And the same thing in Western thought. You have a multitude, you have people certainly, and at the same time you have populace, and you have masses, and so on, and you have classes. So which one you need? This is why I'm saying it is very confusing as a term, and it should not be taken for granted. But for a certain time, specific time, it is very important. And right now, in the street, it is very important because it is expressive of a collective work. And we should be working with it accordingly. Now, is this enough? Is a verbal thrust, and depending on using, that is, anthems and poetry, is it enough to forge a kind of a collective or to carve a collective will? No. You need other icons, because what we are talking about, this reclamation cannot take place unless you bring together very many items together. One of them is the state can tell you, well, listen, what you are doing, actually you are endangering the security of the nation state. And as you know, that is what Hosni Mubarak, for instance, in Egypt mentioned in his first speech. This is very dangerous. You are working with the enemies of the country then. This is what Zayn Abdin bin Ali also would be telling them in the first speech. He was threatening them as terrorists. So you need to know that within this discursive fight and struggle, you need to be very careful too. And the young generation proved that it was very careful. It was very careful. It did not resort to any divides at all. Things, that is slogans, that might divide the people. It needs to bring them together. And that is why there is no sectarian, class, or gender divide. All are together. And suddenly you find the street or the square working together as if it were a theater. A theater which is, according to Brecht in this case, there is a correspondence between that kind of the theater, the player, and the audience. There is no separation between the two. Everything is clear so far? I'm slowing, as you know, for your sake. That is. So that is one thing which we need to know. As I said then, the variable is not enough by itself as long as the state has the media. And the state being in control, fully in control of the media, certainly there is very little left for you to work with. This is what the young generation tried to invade, certainly, and make very good use of. How? That is, they went to the social media, they penetrated into that, they established new links among themselves as groups, and at the same time with the rest of the population. However, we should not be exaggerating the role of the social media as to negate the powers in history that are capable of making a struggle possible. Because that is very dangerous, certainly. In this case, you eliminate the meaning of struggle and you make it very superficial. If all the fights can be done within the social media, I tell you, nothing will be successful and nothing can be certain. Remember that the internet is not in your hands after all. There are also, like any other monopoly, it can be used by very many powers. So it is always a case which we need to be very careful so that we won't push. But it is definitely a new public sphere which is being added to what we know already. The cafe, the salon, the street, everything, and also to the press. And the print, generally. The print industry, or the culture industry, for a long time has been restricted to the print. Right now, we have the additional and wider circulated media, that is the social media, which has been helpful, certainly, in the dissemination of information and possibly knowledge. So that is something which we need also to understand. So here is a factor. But remember, too, that this factor needs other elements to help it to implement a fight or a struggle against another power which is monopolizing the media. It has its own media. The state in this case, and let us say, for instance, Egypt is an example, or Tunisia, both of them before the movements, before the popular revolution, they had the control. Now, you can say, well, the satellite TV, yes, but also you can have, as a state, you can have a blackout on the internet and on the satellites too, which happened, as you know, in Tunisia, and it happened in Egypt. So that possibility you should know. And this is why people decided to use the telephone, the mobile. When there was a blackout too, they used the land kind of telephone line, and so on. So people will try to penetrate. This is why I'm saying we should understand that there are other channels to work with in order to spread the information. What we know, there is still a technological revolution, and this is being made use of. That is good. Now, as I said, this is not enough by itself. We need really to work on something else. And that is the iconic. And what is the meaning of the iconic? Am I talking only about emblems and signs and so on? Yes, I'm talking about these, but at the same time, I'm adding to these very many other elements. Let us go to the flag itself. The flag certainly has been, well, I mentioned that early on before when it started. I gave a talk at NYU, New York, that is, university. And later on it became sort of popular because some journals were also attending. And what I said then, that the fight on the flag is a fight for the nation. This is a platitude. I mean, what is new in that, you can say? No, there is a lot of something new in that. You see, what is happening is that the nation state has been always, this is why you find the flag on any official state, any official site, right? That is because the state always associates its own legitimacy with the flag. And this is why the flag, how it is posed, how it is shown, and so on, always carries along with it very many other signs and significations for that matter. So the flag is very important. It is there on all the ministries, for instance, and the offices of the government. Now, what happened to the demonstrators and the protesters is that they used the flag. They used huge flags to cover themselves in these demonstrations. Now, this will put the security office in jeopardy. What should they do? Should they shoot? Should they shoot the flag? Should they shoot only at people who are not covered by the flag? And that is what happened, by the way. They tried to shoot from the other side, and they single out specific individuals. They don't know them, but they are not the ones who are carrying the flag. Because that is the problem. They know that the fight for the flag will be a serious fight, and anybody can quote that or show a picture saying that they shot somebody who's carrying a flag. So a fight for the flag is a fight for legitimacy. It is very important to notice that. Now, go to another incident. When Gaddafi in Libya, that is, decided to beat the first city which protested, that is Benghazi, what they did, they went back to the monarchic flag, the flag which was actually by Omar Khayyam, by Omar al-Mukhtar. That is, long time ago, it was there as a flag of Omar al-Mukhtar in his fight against the Italian occupation. So they went back to that. And they went back also to the slogan and the anthem which was used at that time during the monarchy. That is after the independence from the Italian power. And look at the fight for the flag. Suddenly, the flag was all over because the flag itself will have a special resonance, certainly, against another flag which is just totally green, meaningless. The color in the flag, which was associated with the struggle against the colonial, has very many colors. These colors borrow from two sources. The first source is the Ottoman. So, an Islamic identity, which has all the North African side, that is the crescent and the star. All these, if you look at them, you find it in Libya, that is right now, and before that in the struggle against the Italians, Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria. So you find all this, just the Ottoman presence. Does this mean really subservience to the Ottoman? No, to Islam. An identification. It is a sign. Now what else? The rest are the three colors. What are they? Why the green and the black and so on, the white? These colors are very important because this is what is called the Arab Revolution. Why? Because by the end of the 19th century, there was an effort to fight back the Ottomans politically as aggressors. And there was also an effort to identify themselves as an Arab. revolution. And suddenly you find that the flag was all over. This is why you find it in Iraq, in Syria, in Palestine, and everywhere. UAE, everywhere with the exception of Saudi Arabia. I mean, after the Wahhabis. So you have all this combination then, which is very important, from where they took it, that flag, the signs, the symbols. They took it from the 14th century, poet by the Iraqi poet Safiuddin al-Hilli, in which he described how they used to be, generals and such, how they have these green fields, and how they used to leave the battles red. That is to say, they are very tough fighters, and so on. So that combination of colors then is coming from poetry, and it has this kind of resonance in it. Look at the combination, very important. This is not exactly what is happening in the Arab East. In the Arab West then, we have a different kind of syntax. A combination of the Islamic and the national, or the nationalist, and which is not exactly the same thing, the divide between the two in the Arab East. That is either the Saudi one or the Arab combination. You see that kind of divide. So these are very important for us to notice whenever we try to study this kind of revolution, which I'm doing anyway, a book which should be appearing in the next 4 or 5 months. So all these are very important for us, and this is why my idea of staging is working as such, that there is this kind of collective. You might be asking then, but what is the outcome of that kind of revolution? Or uprising, or popular movements, or whatever you call them, according to what I call the formation processes. That is, we should not anymore be thinking only of individuals or leaders or whatever. We should be thinking of a complexity in a process which is a formation process. So that is something we keep in mind. Now, you might then be saying, but we can talk not about what is the outcome politically, and how long will it take? Because, as I told you, there are very many other factors which are going to be functioning in that makeup. But for the time being, we need to know that there are a few things which are making the outcome. What are they? On the language level, then, if you speak about rhetoric, then, first of all, you have a divide between the nation-state rhetoric, which has been emptied of any meaning for a long time. It is useless jargon. Well, the jargon of politicians when they speak, nonsense. Usually, I mean, a shorthand kind of reduction, which is meant to affect people, generally speaking, if they listen to it, if they take it without analysis, and they accept it, anything. That is. And between the new language, the language which you are making yourself as an individual, as a community, you are creating that, this kind of language, and you are connecting to this kind of language. It is your language. It is not a language given to you. You are speaking your own language. See what I mean? So that is what is happening. This comes usually, the use of your own language, it comes certainly with something else. Usually a reclamation of your self-identity and identification. You are no longer suffering or passing through this identification process. And as such, you are altogether okay and one with yourself. No divide. You are not suffering from that thing. And this is why your language is still pure and direct. It doesn't need an interpretation. It is not loaded with metaphors. It's free, as you are. And that is exactly what is happening. It comes with the fall of the barrier of fear. That is when you are no longer paranoid or afraid. When you are no longer suffering or passing through very many constraints, you are capable of liberating yourself. And this kind of emancipation is very important insofar as the formation of language is concerned. This is why that is first. Let us look at that as important. The other thing is what we call epistemological, in the sense that what we are witnessing is a new movement in knowledge. How does this work? when we say that it is epistemological, that is to say a serious shift in knowledge, that we are not talking about merely movement or gradual. No. But if you go back to the first speech, no, the second or the third, yeah, the second perhaps, speech of Hosni Mubarak, for instance, and the same thing, because they duplicate each other, you see. The revolutions, by the way, also, they replicate each other. And this is why the failure of the replicate always, or at least, I mean, the pitfalls, because you shouldn't copy. And the state also is copying each other. So Hosni Mubarak tried to copy Zayn al-Abidin. He knew that Zayn al-Abidin failed, but nevertheless he couldn't. Remember that George W. Bush also copied Saddam. If you go to the speeches, you will be surprised how each one is trying, even to take it for granted that you don't like this individual. But the mere fact that you don't like him means you are watching him. And watching him, you are contaminated by him. So you have that process of contamination being carried between the rivals, usually. If they are then not rivals, they are duplicates. That is also another story, because the duplicates, it means that actually they are taken from each other. And in the second speech then, Hosni Mubarak would be telling people that, listen, I am really like your father. You are too young to know about politics. I know a lot. So you need to go and relax and take it easy and things will be okay. That's it. What is the meaning of this? It means that for a long time, patriarchy has taken it for granted that they can lead you, that you are incapable of leading yourself. You see, in terms of you are still adolescent, and for that matter, you need somebody to lead you. Now, so what happened? What happened is that in this kind of collective movement, is that the feeling of strength coming back. So in a state of difference, that is what you have a sense of difference, that people are ready to make a stand and to tell the patriarchy, in this case, that we are different from you. And that is what's happening. That is quite a breakthrough. And that is very important. And huge efforts, usually in the media, will be spent on that very kind of new divide. Because they don't need it, they don't want it. That is quite disruptive, as you know, to very many systems. And that sense that I am new, I am emancipated, is something which is going to carry with it a kind of different understanding of what is the meaning of language, what is the meaning of economy, what is it, and so on. It means that you need to have your share. You need to be a real participant in the economy, in politics, in everything, and decision making. So it is no longer, this is why I'm saying the concept of democracy is to be revisited accordingly, because this is a new understanding for these masses. It is collective in the sense that everybody is telling you the same story. And this is why there is no compromise in the slogans, other slogans like irhal, depart, degage, go. They don't want no negotiation in this matter. You go, and with you is the system. You see, so that kind of division is important for us to understand what is happening then. It is non-negotiable. And there is no such thing as a contract. That negation, as I told you, is very important because it is epistemological in the sense that it is going to carve something in you and the understanding of people, no matter what other outcomes might be. This matter, but this you cannot change. It is already taking place. And if you want really to work, then you need to take this into consideration and work accordingly. Not the other way around, you see. So so instead of mere subservience and subordination, you have the idea of protest. Protest in this case is not merely a professional somebody going and raising a slogan, I want my rights and so on. No, no. It is against the consensus. In the sense, it is the census. An idea that I argue back against any misuse of power. And that comes, as I told you, with this kind of a new understanding, which is leading the societies differently, and certainly in the long run, I would say, it will be making serious changes within the society itself. How to put all this within another frame? I mentioned certainly poetry to you. Yeah. I mentioned poetry, and I think perhaps you need a little bit about that. And when we speak about poetry, we need to understand that poetry can be very effective in certain societies, and especially in the Arab world, generally speaking, it should be very effective. Remember that the event which took place in Tunisia, the self-immolation of a vendor called Mohammed Bouazizi, has led, as we know, to that kind of revolution, right? I mean, that is something which we know. So that by itself is very important to notice, because how do we see it? You've got self-immolation of somebody in the street of Tunisia, which will be angering all his generation, the youth, who felt that really he protested against such and such. But does this tell us more? Yes, it does actually tell us more. It is not only a culmination of a protest. That is to say, when you feel that you are left powerless, there is nothing else to do. What else is left to you? And this is your voice then. So it is not only that you regain a voice only in your death, and that kind of voice certainly will be reaching everybody else and affecting them accordingly. It is not only that, but let us go into the poetry, as I told you. Why our poetry, the one which they used in these demonstrations, didn't work in his own time. There is a reason for that. There is a reason for that. Then, aside from the objective, as they call it, circumstances or conditions, there are very many. Definitely, the nation state, since the late 60s onward in the Arab world, has been sort of revoking and abrogating its own promise. So it didn't deliver on its promises. According to the contract, supposedly, between the nation state and the masses, there is usually benefits for compliance. That is, I'll give you all these achievements and you comply with what I'm doing. Now, if the state does not deliver on that, a failure in that could raise anger. This we know, but this is always valid in any society, anywhere. It could be certainly running out of hand, and it could cause a lot of trouble. Protests, demonstrations, and so on and so on. Now, we need something, as I said, to bring this together. And the poetic is very important. In the Arab region then, it didn't work in the 30s. When the Tunisian poet had his poem. It didn't work in the 50s, when you have very many poets usually writing about the regenerative process. That is to say, when they applied in their poetry the idea of generation after death. That is, there is always death and there is always regeneration. And this regeneration is going to bring life back. It is, you can say, it is very much the vegetation myth of Virgil. You can go even further, and so on. That is not, it didn't work. All of them thought of that as a promise. There is a possibility, and most of the poetry of the 50s is written in that direction. You find Sayyad, you find Khalil Hawi, you find all these poets writing about that. But it didn't deliver too. Poetry, because nationalism failed. Not nationalism itself as an idea, but the nation state itself, which is supposed to be carrying on this kind of nationalism, didn't fail. 1967 was very much of a disappointment to all these people. And Nasser, who was the great leader for nationalism, well, was powerless at that time. Certainly why? Because again, a nationalist discourse has aggrandized Nasser into a hero, a disproportionate heroism, without taking into account that the non-aligned movement cannot cope with the powers at that time and the politics in the region. So what we had then, we shouldn't be surprised then when Khalil Hawi, among very many others, killed himself in 1982. He was very much a strong believer, certainly, in this kind of regenerative process. He felt that there was a possibility for this nation to be reborn. And all of them who wrote in that direction felt the same thing. And right now, Beirut is occupied, he felt that nothing could be done. And there is no power in the nation. And he felt this is what is left for him. What is left for him is death. So he took the rifle and he killed himself. That was Khalil Hawi. This is why you find Mahmoud Darwish writing about that moment. This is why you find Samih al-Qasim writing, also another Palestinian poet writing about that. All of them feel that actually there is nothing to say. Certainly it is an indictment to poetry altogether, because all the poets felt the same thing, that they cannot deliver themselves on the early promise which they used to hold. That is to say, the promise that there will be a regeneration, there will be a nation, and so on. So what you have then, you have right now a different moment in history. Muhammad Bouazizi, just an ordinary vendor, fruit vendor, coming to the streets, and after that story with the municipality, he set himself ablaze, on fire, and suddenly you find that the internet taking that, YouTube, the demonstrators themselves, but this, we shouldn't make us forget that a few months before him, in Gafsa, in one of the mines, the state has executed 8 miners who were protesting, accused them of violence and so on. So that is, you need to know. What I'm saying, this is a culmination of, and it should be seen within that context. But what is happening is that meaning or life is given a new impetus. What we have right now, there is a poetry in action. And this vendor in the street himself is writing a poem. This is why in the Tahrir Square, when the Egyptian poet, Muhammad Fuad Najib, was asked by Al Jazeera satellite TV, whether he has any poem. He said, no, these young people are writing poetry right now. That is, whatever is being done in action by this young generation is poetry. So poetry is taking a different meaning, like Muhammad Bouazizi setting himself on fire in order to let his voice reach everybody else. The same thing is happening in poetry itself. Poetry as democracy, as well as the meaning of people, is made on the street, here, now, in the square. And this is why it is a collective will which we should be watching for. Thank you.